if you could change one person's life, like, wouldn't that be enough? And in order to get past a lot of those fears and a lot of that imposter syndrome that, again, is going to pop up for everyone, you have to have that support.
What's up, guys? Thanks for tuning into the Why Influence podcast, where we interview influencers about their why and motivation for sharing online. I'm your host, Jeremy Siegel, and today our guest is Kate Erickson. Kate is JLD's partner in life. JLD is the host of Entrepreneurs on Fire, one of the largest podcasts out there. Kate does all the behind-the-scenes stuff for that podcast. So Entrepreneurs on Fire has 3,300 iTunes reviews. In comparison, my podcast has 30 iTunes reviews. They've got 2,200 episodes and they get over 1 million listeners every month. But Kate also has a podcast with her own voice on it, which is more targeted to the behind-the-scenes processes of that podcast. And she has created over 250 episodes on her podcast. Kate's created several workbooks on productivity and podcasting, helping people be more streamlined and figuring out how to have their voice. And she does a lot of public speaking and workshops on all of that. Without giving any more spoilers, let's jump into the interview.
Welcome to the Why Influence podcast, where we deep dive into the why behind some of the world's most influential people. Why do you influence? Why are you an influencer? We hope to inspire you to share your voice with the world. And now, your host, Jeremy Siegel.
Kate, thanks so much for coming on the show today and making time to be here with us.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Jeremy.
Of course. Do you mind giving us a 2 to 3 sentence, just elevator pitch about what it is that you're doing as far as influence?
Yeah, absolutely. So online, really everything that we do drives towards helping entrepreneurs create lifestyle and financial freedom in their life.
Okay. To jump into getting an unintended consequence early on, is there someone that comes to mind that really touched your heart, that's someone that you impacted and they came and told you how much impact that you had on them and in a way that you didn't really anticipate having?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, I'm so grateful for this because it's like, there's a lot of times on your journey, I'm sure you can relate when like you kind of feel like knocked down, or you even start to question like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And going back to some of these stories that like I never expected to receive of like literally changing people's lives is just such a massive motivator and huge part of why we do what we do. Just last week, John and I were actually getting ready for bed, and he showed me a direct message that he got on Instagram from somebody who purchased the Freedom Journal, which is our journal to help you set and accomplish your number one goal in 100 days.
Yes.
And
one of your other journals here.
Awesome. Twins. I'm actually working through the podcast journal right now. That's awesome.
Nice.
But yeah, he was like on day 83 and he had lost over 100 pounds. And it wasn't only just like this massive like celebratory moment for the fact that he is improving his life personally and getting his health on track, but he shared with us what that has done for his relationship with his wife, his relationship with his kids. And so it went like so much deeper, right? That like we created the journal to help people set and accomplish their number one goal, to help people like stay accountable to following through with doing what they say they're going to do. But to not only hear that he's accomplishing that goal, but how it's like ripple affecting his life in so many different areas. And like,
that's pretty amazing.
It gives me chills. Like I get goosebumps thinking about it. And I just think that's a really amazing example. When I saw that, I went to bed so happy.
That's awesome. That just happened, right?
Yeah. I mean, like within the week.
So that's not uncommon to be getting these stories coming in.
Yeah, I mean, more so now than like in the very beginning, but even in the very beginning, it was so cool to hear someone reach out and say, because of you, I was inspired to start my own podcast. And again, it goes back to that ripple effect. And I think when you talk about unintended consequences, like a lot of us start to perhaps impact one person. And if you can make a change in one person's life, like that's huge, right? That is like a huge accomplishment. But to then think that you've impacted one person's life and they're going to go impact one person's life, and how that continues to go on and on.
Yeah, the compound effect.
Really, yeah, absolutely. So I love that. I love that.
Awesome. So speaking of the beginnings, where were you at the beginning of this? Like when you say the beginning of when you're working into this influence, like what was the beginning like for you, or what did that look like?
So the beginning was really tough for me because I didn't grow up knowing that entrepreneurship existed. Like a lot of interviews that I listened to with like really successful entrepreneurs and influencers, like it's almost as like they were born that way, or like they sold candy to their friends at school, and that's how they like learned about entrepreneurship and they understood what this was. And like I didn't grow up in a family of entrepreneurs. I didn't become an entrepreneur myself until I was like 28 or 29 years old. I didn't even know what it was until that point. So the beginning of my journey was not only taking like these huge risks and taking these huge leaps from leaving every safety net I ever knew, like working in the corporate world and climbing that ladder and going to college and trying to get a job that matches your degree, and like all these expectations in this path that you've just kind of been like conditioned to understand that that's the way that things are. And so not only was I leaving that, but I was also entering this world that I didn't know. I didn't know anything about entrepreneurship. And I learned so quickly, so much about myself and all the blocks that I had, all the mindset blocks, and just basically the lies that I had been telling myself pretty much my entire life about like who I was and how I show up. And I learned very quickly becoming an entrepreneur that you're not really living your life and truly putting yourself out there until you get outside of your comfort zone. And it's a really uncomfortable thing to do for somebody who's not used to doing it, right? So I remember when I tried to start my own business the first time, and there was this networking group called Propel, and their whole purpose was to bring people together like at mixers and like monthly events so that you could network, meet other people in the community, be surrounded by other people who are on a similar journey to you. And I remember showing up at the first one of those mixers. I literally hung up my coat and I went to the bathroom. Like I had so much anxiety around like how I was going to talk to people and what people were going to think of me, and thinking that everybody else in that room must have been like so much smarter than me and that they probably already have businesses started and they probably are already successful. But that was just it. It was throwing myself into things like that one step at a time that really got me to a place where I started feeling more comfortable when I went to networking events, and like I could go to a conference and start a conversation with someone. And it then became like, I became quite passionate actually about going out of my way to try and help people that I knew were in the same position that I was in just a couple of years prior, very uncomfortable and just feeling like out of my comfort zone.
Right. Yeah. So that's for the networking and the entrepreneurship piece. And then as far as the sharing piece goes, when did you really start sharing and being like authentic and vulnerable? When did that happen in your journey?
So I joined the Entrepreneurs on Fire team, teamed up with John in the business in 2013. 2013. Yeah, it was April 2013. And by January 2015, yeah, okay. So August 2014, about a year after that, I launched my podcast. And that for me was really like a massive step in overcoming and stepping into, leaning into something that made me really uncomfortable, but that I knew was like a very good transition into like being on a podcast. Like I don't have to be in a room with 100 people and that sort of thing. So podcasting really became my stepping stone to putting my voice out there. And I actually started doing it on the blog initially when I joined the team, and writing was really like my gateway to share my journey and my lessons and just kind of how I was feeling about entrepreneurship in general with our audience. Then it turned into the podcast. And once I launched the podcast, my next goal became speaking, which again, like was one of those things where I'm like, no, I could never get up on stage. I'd be way too nervous. I wouldn't be able to deliver. Again, telling myself all these lies and then therefore being that way because that's what I'm telling myself. And the first time I got up on stage was January 2015. So it took me a year after joining the team of being on the blog, being on social media, going to networking events, going to conferences, and really taking steps forward that way, then to launching the podcast, and then the podcast getting me to that next step of speaking on stage. And I feel like that progression and understanding that it didn't all have to happen like right at once within like a very short period of time it's baby steps. It's putting yourself out there a little bit and becoming more and more comfortable in one area and then continuing to challenge yourself from there.
Yeah, that's great. That's very similar to my journey as well. So for you, you were with EOFire for about a year before doing your podcast. You did some blogs talking about things, but you didn't really have a voice till your podcast. What were some barriers, self-made barriers that you had to doing your podcast? And would you have started earlier if you didn't have those barriers? Like, just what kind of barriers come up to mind when you think about the early days?
I mean, definitely just the imposter syndrome of thinking like, why me? Who's going to want to listen? What value do I have to add? And I try to, and I still am working on this constantly every single day. When I have those thoughts come into my mind, because we all deal with the imposter syndrome, even like the biggest influencers in the world, subconsciously or like you just innately, like these things pop up in our mind, right? And I've really made it a point to start to recognize when those things are coming up for me and be able to step back and objectively say, like, basically prove myself wrong of like, when I was thinking all those things leading up to starting my podcast, like, who am I to share this? I haven't really been an entrepreneur for that long. Why would anyone want to listen to me? But then I took a step back and I started thinking like, okay, if I'm going to share on an episode, like a behind the scenes of how we do X, Y, or Z in our business, like that is like, why could I not share that? Because that's like something in my everyday that I actually did that. So it's crazy for me to think that I can't share that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
And that gave you the confidence to do it because you're in that world seeing John and other people doing these podcasts, and then you're just talking about yourself. So that made it an easy topic to get into.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, was there also a time where you had to give yourself permission? Did you have to give yourself permission for any of these steps through your journey?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the biggest ones for me was giving myself permission to get up on stage. And like, I remember how nervous I was and how nerve-wracking it was going into that preparation. But like, those are the times when having support and having people rallying around you is so critical, and being able to ask for support. So I reached out to a friend of mine who I had met online, and I knew that like her business was around helping people come up with a talk. So she would just like have a chat with you, a very natural conversation around what you wanted to get across in your talk. She basically would put together the bullet points and everything. She'd coach you through practicing that talk. And that was so instrumental in like helping me get past that. So it was like giving myself permission not only to ask for support, but then saying like, instead of who am I to do this, like who am I not to do this? And the crazy thing is like that first talk that I did, it like went over so well. And I got so much positive feedback that then was such an encourager for like moving forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. And congrats, by the way, for accomplishing that through your journey. Those are giant steps to overcome for a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you so much.
As far as, I guess, if you were to meet an aspiring influencer, maybe not someone that says, I want to be an influencer, but they want to make an impact on a larger level, and they haven't started yet, or maybe they're just starting out, what would be some of the biggest tips or tricks that you would tell this person in their early days and starting out?
To find that support. I mean, I think so many people, they try and go it alone. And especially when you have those fears around all the imposter syndrome, like who am I and how am I going to make this work? And there's probably already somebody else out there doing this. So like, what difference am I going to be able to make? It goes back to those unintended consequences and just being able to help one person. Like if you could change one person's life, like wouldn't that be enough? And in order to get past a lot of those fears and a lot of that imposter syndrome that again is going to pop up for everyone, you have to have that support. So I would say, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to really go that extra mile to surround yourself with the people who are going to help support you. And yeah, that's going to make all the difference. It certainly has for me.
Awesome. Well, then I'd like to drill a little bit into your why here. So you started your podcast and the topic you chose was to share the behind the scenes of EOFire. So why did you feel that it's so important to be sharing that with people?
I was feeling like a lot of the content out there was very inspiration based, which I think is absolutely necessary. And I draw from that content all the time and I consume a lot of that content. But I felt like there was a gap in people actually talking about how they were doing what they were doing in a very transparent way. So it's very easy to see online and to see blog posts and like all this content created around multi-million-dollar launches and like how I made $7 million through Facebook ads. And like, that's great if they did, but like, where's the back end to that? Like, how do I actually do that? Because it's amazing to draw inspiration and know that that's possible. But if nobody's teaching you how to do that, then what are you left with? And so my goal was to really fill that gap and to very transparently show people like these are the exact steps that we're taking to do what we do. So John does an amazing job on the Entrepreneurs on Fire podcast of like inspiring people and bringing entrepreneurs on to share their journey and to share how they got to where they're at. And I just felt like it would be a really amazing compliment, especially because it's kind of my wheelhouse here at Entrepreneurs on Fire, to share that, like how we do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So why is it so important for people to know how you're doing things there at Entrepreneurs on Fire, like the impact that you're having on sharing all that?
Well, one, so again, so that they know it's possible, but so that they can go out and do it. I mean, my hope is that when I share these steps and when I share that behind the scenes, that people are able to pick and choose for things that they might be doing in their business to say, oh, okay, now I not only know what they did, now I know exactly how to do it and I can do it too. And that again is, if we can make that impact and we can teach someone how to do something that has been a massive success for us and a success for our audience in terms of like what we're able to deliver to them, then that's that ripple effect. Now we teach them how to do it. They can go out and they can create that same impact for their audience.
Okay. And I'm going to go one layer deeper here. So why is it so important for the people to know that they can do it, like to learn it and then see you're doing it, and then for them to have the confidence that they can do it and bring it to the world? Like, why is that so important?
Yeah. So, I mean, that brings us back to the beginning, right? Like that's how we help people accomplish lifestyle and financial freedom, is if you can get to that space where you have a framework that you can use and you can try things and you can overcome your doubts and your fears and you can implement that stuff, then that's how you achieve what we're trying to help you achieve.
And it's important to help people achieve the lifestyle and freedom because
that's freedom.
Okay.
I mean, that's why I do what I do, is because I want freedom in my life. I want to do what I want, when I want, with who I want. And that's what I want other people to understand, that is possible for their life, that you don't have to follow the prescribed journey, that you don't have to go to college and get a job and spend your life in corporate, driving to work in a car, sitting in a cubicle, hating your job, never being able to spend time with your family, never getting to take the vacations you want to take, and spending 90% of your life doing things that you don't want. Like, you have the choice to create the exact life that you want to live. And if I can help you create a business that affords you lifestyle and financial freedom, then you can choose what that freedom is for you. I
think that's pretty amazing, because you started out not even knowing this world existed. And then now you're leading the front of a movement, helping masses of people to achieve this lifestyle that you've discovered through your life. And I think that's awesome purpose. And thanks for sharing that.
I believe it. Thank you so much.
Going back to the tips and tricks, if you were to meet someone who's already an established podcaster and you had some tips and tricks that you felt like you were doing differently at EOFire or with your podcast or people that you've talked with, what are some secret sauce things that you would suggest for helping someone that's already established sort of level up their game?
I mean, this is not the answer that any established podcaster is going to want to hear, but I do believe that it's the truth, is that it's the foundation of your podcast that is going to help you get that growth. I've been podcasting for 5 years. I launched my podcast, Kate's Take, 5 years ago. John's been podcasting since 2012, so over 7 years now. I'm going through the podcast journal right now and doing those foundational steps for a podcast that I'm launching January 2020. And the impact that those foundational steps are having on the creation of my podcast and what I know will be such an intimate understanding of my ideal listener, my avatar, my ability to connect and engage with them when that podcast does launch, is going to be unlike any other growth tactic, because if you don't understand your avatar, if you don't know what your niche is, then there's no way that you're going to be able to up level your podcast. You're going to be like spinning your wheels.
That's awesome advice. So we're running out of time here. Before I let you give a spiel about what you have going on, so some people can go and find you, I'd like to see if you have any last words for our audience, because there's a lot of people that are struggling to see that they have a voice, or people that want to start sharing but don't really know how. Do you have any last words of wisdom or advice that you could share with them?
Well, if anyone's looking to share their voice through a podcast, then we have a lot of very free resources that we share with people around how to create and launch your own podcast. One of them is free podcast course. And we're very passionate about helping people get to where they want to go with that. And if that is launching a podcast, then I invite anyone to please leverage the free resources that we have.
Very cool. Well, but before I let you go, I'm going to put all the links to all of your workbooks and your websites and your social medias on the show notes for the episode. But if you would like to specifically shout out your podcast or your course or your upcoming podcast that you're working on right now, or anything else, I'll open the floor for you there.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Everything that we do is over at EOFire.com. And for anyone who is interested in getting into podcasting, freepodcastcourse.com is where that free course is at.
Okay. Thanks again for taking the time to come on the show today. And I hope you have a great remainder of 2019.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. You too.
Thanks. Well, that concludes the interview. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen in. Again, Kate, thanks for coming on the show and being vulnerable with us. One of my favorite nuggets that Kate shared with us is about one of her struggles, which is imposter syndrome. And we've heard that before. But she talked about how she overcame imposter syndrome, and that was by getting support and building a support network. Early on, she would ask herself, who am I to do this? Or who would listen to me? Or why should someone listen to me? She would have these kind of thoughts going through her head. And so she found a support network that could help give her the confidence she needs to be able to overcome that imposter syndrome and then just start contributing value. I think it's pretty interesting how Kate was immersed in this world. She was immersed in a world where JLD was posting daily podcast episodes where he was interviewing entrepreneurs and making a big impact, seeing all the unintended consequences that were coming in as a result of that. And it still took Kate a year to build up the confidence to start her podcast and to start sharing. So many people we bring here on the show have their struggle with starting to share, and Kate could have theoretically started sharing earlier, but it took that year to figure that out, that she had tons of value to share. She figured out that she wanted to have a voice, that her voice mattered. All those things, it takes time for all that to come to play. And that's what this podcast is about, to try to shortcut that for you. She is immersed in one of the most immersive environments to be immersed in for seeing the value for sharing. And it still took a year. Not to say that that wasn't fast or not. Everyone has their own different time frames, but it's just, you may not be in an environment where you're seeing people share. And maybe this podcast is your only outlet to see the value in that. And hopefully we can shortcut some of that for you. Maybe we can help you start sharing faster than a year just by listening to these episodes. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here. But anyway, I think it's just interesting, and she's now delivering so much value and helping thousands of entrepreneurs figure out their voice and help them start sharing and scaling up their sharing. So I think that's awesome. After the interview was over, I wanted to ask for feedback on the podcast, but she said someone was at her door and she had to take off, so I didn't get to ask that. Also, this was a 30-minute interview as opposed to normally we're scheduled for an hour time slot. And by the time we got connected and started the interview, now you're 5 or 10 minutes into the half-hour time slot we had. So it was a pretty quick interview, much faster than the normal. And I thought we did a good job keeping on time and ending at a good time. So I was pretty proud of myself for how we handled this 30-minute time slot as opposed to the last 30-minute one, which I think was Brendan Kane. I think I struggled to get the most value out of that 30 minutes. I feel like we did a pretty good job in this one. I think there's a lot to learn from Kate in regards to her journey and what she struggled with. She started her podcast, and then that led to her getting opportunities to speak publicly on that topic. And she just sort of grew step by step and baby steps. And I think it's just worth taking note that that's her journey, and it's very similar to a lot of other people. So just know that you don't need to just automatically be comfortable standing on stage talking to a bunch of people. It takes baby steps to get there, and Kate did that for herself. And now she's a couple of years into it, and she's able to do her workshops and talk publicly comfortably, and she's done over 250 podcast episodes on her podcast, and she's been guests on many other shows. So it comes with time. And I think you'd agree it's pretty cool to see Kate's journey sort of explained in the way it was in this episode. After the podcast was over, I sent Kate an email just saying thanks for being a guest in the podcast. And I said that one of my biggest struggles is getting high caliber guests on the show. So if she had any suggestions on how I could go about it, or maybe if she had any people she could introduce me to bring more guests on the show, I would definitely appreciate it. And she gave some pretty valuable advice, something I've thought about before but never executed on. And she sort of just brought it back to my attention. And that is to find other podcasts who interview influencers, see what influencers are going on those shows, and then I can drill into seeing of those who would be a potential fit for this podcast, and then reaching out to them because they're people that are more likely to be open to being a guest on a podcast, and that could be one tactic. I would like to bring you more content and more value, and right now I'm doing it through interviews exclusively pretty much. I'm just struggling to get the guests that we need to keep consistent, and it sort of goes in waves. I'll get a chunk of people and then it stops, a chunk of people and it stops. So I'm trying to streamline it so I can have a little more consistency to that, and I think that Kate's suggestion will help with that. If you'd like to learn more about Kate or reach out to her directly, then I suggest you go to the show notes page of this episode. Navigate to whyinfluence.com, whyinfluence.com. Navigate to episode 27. That's Kate Erickson's episode. And there you'll find all the links and all the information that you need. Now, again, our mission is to inspire the sharing of hidden knowledge and wisdom. So if you know anybody who has hidden knowledge and wisdom and is not sharing it, or people that want to share that aren't quite sharing yet, or people that are sharing that want to level up, then please consider sharing this podcast with them so you can help those people share more and you can help on our mission. As usual, I'd love to hear from you. So if there's anything you'd like to say to me, the impact you got from this episode, or you like the podcast, well, first of all, leave an iTunes review because that helps a ton. And then other than that, you can send me an email, send me a PM, or join our Why Influence community. But in any case, the biggest thing you can do to help the podcast is to share it with someone. So please take a moment and send a link to somebody in your network, and I would really appreciate it. As always, give yourself a pat on the back for making it through the entire episode, and I will see you in the next one.